is Linda, and I am really delighted today to introduce to you a friend of mine, Paco Alvarez, also known as Brian Paco Alvarez. But Paco and I met, I think, when he was on the development committee for a client of mine, and we got to be friends. And I'm really fascinated by some of the things he's involved in that he's going to tell you about his spirituality, and it's a very unique one. So, Paco, maybe the first question I'd like to ask you is, and you can certainly fill in any other background, but I know that you're a Wiccan priest, and I think a lot of people don't really understand what Wicca is, and I have some inkling, but I'm not well versed in it. So, can you tell us about the basics of Wicca? What are their beliefs and their practices?
Well, Linda, thank you for having me on and to talk about my religious path, considering, I'm like stereotypical of a lot of people that go into alternative religious practices. I come from a Jewish Catholic background, father Catholic, mother Jewish. I'm in therapy. Uh, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, but the reality is I began my journey of exploration way back when I was a kid. Now I have the good fortune of having parents from Argentina, both my mother and my father from Argentina. And you know, Latin Americans in general are much more open to the extrasensorial. And that is that dates back centuries. One, because if you look at Spain as the mother country of a lot of Latin American countries, of all Latin American countries, with the exception of Portugal and Brazil, uh, you know, Spain was a country that was mixed with both Muslim, Jewish, and Catholic and animistic beliefs. And there was always this kind of hybrid belief system up until the time of the Spanish Inquisition, when all that was taken apart. And when the Spanish arrived in the Americas, they were highly influenced by both Native Americans and the very slaves that they brought over to the Americas. Now, also being Catholic and Jewish, there's a level of superstition that exists. But in reality, Latinos, especially in Argentina, there is this level of folk magic that exists in those countries. In Argentina, for instance, a child will end up getting sick, for instance, and the parents will take them. A perfect example of me. I was 8 years old, and I had gotten sick from something I ate, and the doctors couldn't figure it out. They didn't know if it was an allergy. They saw that I was constipated. They tried to give me medication. Blah blah blah. My mother just finally had it, and my aunt Marta, she said, "You know something? I know a lady down the street. She'll take care of Brian." And that was a witch doctor. It's a witch doctor. The little old lady down the street. Which is so stereotypical of of Latin moms knowing someone that could work a little bit of herbal magic. Next thing you know, you're cured. And it's known in Spanish, it's known as el empacho. El empacho it's kind of a malaise that usually it affects children. They just get sick. You're always sick. You're not getting better. For some reason, you're not as active as you were. And so my mother would take me to, the local lady down the street to cure me of any ailment. My mother was also very open to the practice of Santería. My mother was not was not an Aborisha in the Santeria faith, an Aborisha being a practitioner. And so, but she would go to get readings done, the cowrie shells, and those priests known as santeros would help guide my mother through difficult times. I'm a son of divorcees, and so it was not. My mother would always be seeking some kind of spiritual advice, and that's when I realized my mom and my aunts and my grandmother, they always had little things going on. When my mom would always have something in the freezer, a little bag of something. Don't touch that, she would tell me. Same thing she recently passed away, and I found some of my mother's magical workings in the house,
Hmm.
things that would help bring money and prosperity, especially for me. So, folk magic is something that just exists in Latin America. Just you can be a practitioner in Catholicism or Judaism and even Islam or any religion, but there's always this kind of folk magic that exists. Now, because of how I was raised and because my parents believed in anything alternative, alternative practices, religious practices. Also, my parents kind of did not raise me religious. I was taught to respect all religions, respect both sides of my family's faith, but also more importantly, to go and explore. And I remember when I turned 13, my mother said, go find God on your own. It's time for you to just go. And I ended up with the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Oh.
you know. So I lasted a few months with them until my birthday came up and said, oh, you can't celebrate your birthday. And I was like, well, forget that. That's not going to happen. And then there was a very nice little old lady across the street from my house. Her name was Margaret, and I forgot her last name. And Margaret, one day, I was 13, 14 years old, I was young, and she invited me to church. She said, would you want to come to church with me on a Sunday? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so I went, it was a Lutheran church. So I was exposed to Lutheran Faith Good Shepherd, First Good Shepherd, I think, Lutheran church here in downtown Las Vegas. It's still there. There's a school there. And I realized that the Lutherans are like Catholic Light. You know, they their priests or their ministers, pastors, they get married. And I didn't really see much of a difference between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. I mean, not a lot of the pomp and circumstance of the Catholic tradition, but still the message was there, and I think that was important. I went for a long time. I never became a Lutheran, but also after my parents separated and divorced, I began being invited to. Well, I was in high school, and I had a lot of Mormon friends. Growing up in Las Vegas, you have a lot of Mormon friends, and so Linda, I ended up going to some of the Mormon dances because if you get a little pass, they would invite you to the Mormon dances, which were all kids, the teenage dances, and then you had the over 21 dances as well, or the over 18 dances. So they kind of segregated them. And there was a time when they would have the slow dance where couples would dance, and there was always some minder in the cafeteria that would have a Bible. Actually, it wasn't a Bible; it was a Book of Mormon. So they would actually put a book between you so that you weren't too close to the person you were dancing with. It
Well, they
was
tell
so
you
funny.
that the Catholics always said to leave room for the Holy Spirit, so I guess they have their own version of that.
Exactly. So I got influenced by went to Mormons. I went to Mormon church as well, and so I began actually taking the classes, and then something happened where some things in the Mormon church, some of the teachings of the Mormon church were just not for me. I'm sorry. The ancient Toltecs and the Olmecs and Toltecs of Mexico are not the ancient lost tribe of Israel. They're just not. It's just not true. It's a lie. It's terrible. And there was a lot of things about the LDS church that I just couldn't swallow. Now, do I respect the church? Absolutely. Do I respect a lot of their teachings? Not necessarily, but they have a great sense of community. I lived in Salt Lake City back in 1997, and I loved it. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. And we would go to the temple square, and it was a beautiful temple. And we went to the tabernacle, and we saw the Mormon tabernacle choir sing. And of course, um, I love organs. And then right down the street from Temple Square is the church of the Cathedral of the Madeleine, which is the head of the Archdiocese of Salt Lake City, which is this beautiful Catholic cathedral right in the heart of Salt Lake City on West Temple. Beautiful building. And we would go there. We didn't have a lot of money, so they would give you the priests that were head of the church. They would hand you a half a peanut butter jelly sandwich, an apple, and a soda. So we would go every day. And then he would always tell us, but I need to see you at church on Sunday. So we would go. We would go. We actually, it was kind of interesting, this kind of Mormon thing going, this LDS church, and not the LDS, the Catholic church. And then like directly across the street from the Catholic church is the Masonic temple. So there was this great kind of like very spiritual, a lot of spirituality happening. But again, Linda, being brutally honest, I just couldn't. There was just I couldn't find my path. I did start going to a synagogue as well, and of course, you have the different. You have the more conservative synagogues. You have the Reform synagogues as well, and I just couldn't find the right mixture. I don't know. It just didn't God is God, right? And so I needed to find something. I was lost. I was a lost pup in the woods. And so one day I met a woman, uh, and she shares your name, as a matter of fact. And she was a witch. She was a witch. She was a multi-generational witch, and meaning her mother and her grandmother before her. And uh, I began listening to, what she was talking about. And at the same time, now I'm in college and I'm studying anthropology. And I became very fascinated with religious practices, especially religious practices of Native Americans and the occult. And so I began reading books by great occultists, Wiccans like Gerald Gardner, who is the father of the founding of Wicca back in the 1940s. A bit of a controversial figure, but what Gerald Gardner had done is he brought to the forefront European folk magic, which had always existed, especially in places like England, in France. The reason why there were these inquisitions that occurred in Europe is that in the countryside, there were still people practicing the old ways of religion. It wasn't just the Catholic Church, kind of running everything. There was a lot happening. The Catholic Church couldn't control everything. And so in 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, it also was the start of the Spanish Inquisition under Tomás de Torquemada. And that is spread across Europe. So there was this panic, this religious panic that happened. And I think that's when I believe the Catholic Church may have also kind of gone the wayside, because they got drunk off of the wealth of the French courts and and other, the Holy Roman Empire and all that. And so now government and church became very, very intertwined, and it was about control. And whereas I found my light, my true path spiritually in Wicca, when I was afraid of the occult. I was always told, don't practice the occult, it's devil, whatever. And I found that that's not true. That the whole basis of our religious practice and why I've been attracted to Wicca, why I've been in the faith now 31 years, and I've been a high priest now for 26 years. So Wicca is an earth-based folk magic practice and religion based on the movements of the earth around the sun, the changing of the seasons, and a belief in a goddess and a god, where there's a balance between the two. Okay, there's the duality because the two make life, right? So you have to have the two to make life, right? So I liked that balance between the genders. I enjoyed that a lot. I saw that it was also an earth-loving religion. It was very much earth-based. Our holidays, we have the eight-spoked wheel of the year, and so we have eight major holidays a year. One of them is coming up, which is the summer solstice in 2 weeks. So very excited about that. Hence the reason why my house and I have a wreath on the door with sunflowers, because the sunflower is the representation of the summer solstice. Summer solstice being the longest day of the year. It's getting hot here in Las Vegas. But we celebrate, we have four major holidays, or five. Well, all of them are major. We have high holidays and lesser holidays, but we have the two equinoxes. We have the spring equinox and the fall equinox. So in March and in September. And then we have the solstices, which one coincides with the winter and the other one's the summer. So the winter solstice is the changing of the guard between the Holly King and the Oak King. So, and that's part of our mythos. So and then we have the four lesser holidays. But our big holiday, the big holiday, which is the witches' New Year, which is Halloween. And who doesn't like to celebrate Halloween? So, and the holidays represent life and rebirth. So we have at the beginning of the year, we have three major fertility festivals, which coincide very closely with Christian holidays. So we have like St. Valentine's Day, right? So that's our first fertility holiday. We don't call it Valentine's Day. So and then we have the spring equinox, which would coincide with Easter, and a lot of Easter celebration with the Easter bunny and eggs. So that's all pagan based, and we then have Beltane, which is the third and last fertility festival, which is always on May 1st. And then that prepares us for the summer solstice. And then we start the harvest festivals, and that's when I really go crazy, because the harvest festivals are my, fertility festivals not so much, but the harvest festivals are when we make apple cider and we make apple pie and we decorate the house with apples and oranges and flowers. And that's when traditionally you start bringing in the first harvest. So our first holiday, the first harvest festival is August 1st. So that's when I start decorating the house for Halloween. Okay. So yeah, people are like, it's 110 degrees outside August 1st here in Vegas, but the house is already being decorated for Halloween. And then the second harvest festival is, of course, the fall equinox, when everything just turns into pumpkins and you get the changing of the leaves, and we start getting ready for the fall. And then the last of the harvest festivals is Samhain, which falls on March 31st, or March 31st, I'm sorry, October 31st. And that's Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, as we call it, which then also coincides, interestingly enough, with All Saints' Day, which is the Catholic holiday on November 1st. Or Dia de los Muertos as well, which is a Mexican Catholic holiday of celebrating our ancestors. So for us, Halloween is the time of the year when the veil between the worlds is the thinnest. That's the time we communicate with our ancestors. That's the time, we really think about those who left us. Even though in my other religious practice, Lukumi, we think of our ancestors all the time. So we have an altar to them. So I've two different religious practices I have. So, and then we end the year in Wicca with the winter solstice, which is this huge celebration. I always do a big circle. I always get invited to Christmas parties to throw a ritual out there and a blessing for the new year. So it's all based, Wicca is all based on nature, on the movement of the moon and the sun. Full moons are important for us. That's a level of heightened magic. The moon represents the female energy of life, and the sun represents the male energy of life. And so it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. The beauty of Wicca is it's also very decentralized. We don't have a pope, so to speak, right? There are leaders within our community, which is global now, that have left an impact and have written books as well. So there's a lot of books out there. I know right now there's a movement spiritually where a lot of young adults are kind of in They're in a little bit of a loss spiritually because they're not happy with sometimes the heavy-handedness of the monotheistic religions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and kind of the way they marginalize you know uh, groups of people. Whereas Wicca is a much more open. It's open to everybody. Anyone can practice, and we do not uh, require you in any way, shape, or form for you to give up your other religious practices to be a Wiccan. Because our belief, we have a very simple tenet: harm none, do what thou will. And so harm none is you don't use magic to harm others, because otherwise you get the law of three. So anything you throw out is going to come back to you three times. It's kind of like a a pitcher throwing the ball to a catcher. If you're going to throw it out, we're going to throw it back at you, and we will protect ourselves. But um, it's very earth-based. A lot of times we'll just go out in nature and just commune with nature. And it's important to get out. Humans are meant to be out in nature to look at trees and flowers and lakes and mountains and to look at God's creation. It's the beautiful thing. Mother Earth is a beautiful, beautiful place. And so for us, our church is the forest and the deserts and the sea and places like that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a fanatic for Catholic cathedrals. I mean, I'm a nerd for that because I think cathedrals are just beautiful. I mean, churches in general, churches, temples, synagogues, mosques are beautiful. Especially the older ones. So,
I was going to ask you how you think Wicca compares to other religions. I think you've already answered this somewhat. In fact, as you were talking, I was really identifying because I grew up as a Lutheran and then converted to Catholicism. So, I kind of didn't have as many experiences as you have. But as you were talking about the sun being the masculine and the moon being the feminine, I thought immediately of Saint Francis, who I know you're probably a big
huge.
admirer of too. In fact, Paco is the name for Francesco, I guess I should
Yeah. Yeah.
say it in
Oh,
the Spanish
absolutely.
version. But his famous Canticle of the Creatures starts with brother sun and sister moon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any comparisons that you or similarities, I guess, or I know we've mentioned there's certainly a lot of differences, but what similarities do you see between Wicca and some of the other major religions?
It's interesting. Wicca is a pagan religion. And so pagan meaning we don't have one God, but multiple gods. And we are much more open to understanding nature through different spirits and energies out there. And I would say the one I would say Roman Catholicism is somewhat similar just because of the level of pageantry and ceremony, especially I'm a fanatic for the Tridentine Mass, which
Hmm.
is the traditional Latin Mass of the Catholics prior to 1962, obviously, where the priest is or the pastor has his back to the people, but he's praying to the omniscience of God, right? And Jesus, who's at the altar, right? Very similar to us. We do something, but let's face it, historically, Roman Catholicism is very much rooted in pagan practices because it was born out of pagan ancient Rome. The Romans had a very sophisticated religious practice of many gods and goddesses, and Roman Catholicism came out of that. And I think I tell people, I said, if you really want to feel something spiritual, you need to go to a Roman Catholic Mass, preferably in an old cathedral, because you feel the power of God. Um, I, for me, something that I find really interesting, especially both from my Wiccan practices and also my Lukumi practices, my Santería practices, as it's in Spanish, um, are the saints. Roman Catholicism has estimated probably over 10,000 saints, right? Some lost to time, others more popular than than others. And every saint has an aspect whether it's Homogenes, who is the saint over businesses, whether it's Saint Francis of Assisi, whether it's my favorite, Catherine of Siena. They all have this aspect about them that is very similar to the Roman gods or the gods or the spirits of Lukumi. And what's interesting is when Africans were brought, or West Africans were brought from Africa to the Americas uh, to be slaves. I mean, they were stolen, they were taken from their land, sold as slaves. Uh, they brought their religious practices with them. And especially in the Caribbean places like Cuba, Haiti, Brazil, a lot of the islands in the Caribbean, North, South America, and now Central America and farther South America now. Uh, those religious practices of the Yoruba people or the people of the Congo and other cultures, they were able to syncretize their religious practices behind the Roman Catholic saints as a way of hiding their practices from their masters and from the church. So, for instance, today is Monday, and today is the day we celebrate every week. So people say, well, um, uh, the Jewish faith, Saturday is their holy day. Friday night to Saturday afternoon. Um, the Christians is Sunday. For us in the Lukumi faith, is Monday because Monday is the beginning of the week. It's the day of Elegua. Elegua is he is the most important Orisha. He's the one who opens the doors for you and he opens paths for you for enlightenment. He is the yin and yang of our religious practices, and he is the first we acknowledge uh, every time anytime we do a ceremony. Elegua is the one who is taken care of first. And there's a whole pataki, as it's known, a whole fable or story behind, not a fable, but a story behind that. And the Yoruba people or the slaves who were brought over, they syncretized Elegua so he syncretized with several um, uh, Catholic saints, both San Martin de Porres, who is the Black Saint, of course, of South America, of Peru, very, very auspicious and huge. I have actually a sculpture of him right next to Elegua behind me.
Oh.
So I have San Martin de Porres. We have uh, Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony has traits very similar to Elegua, and we also have the baby Jesus of Atocha, who is also syncretized with Elegua. So it does help being a little bit Catholic to understand the faith, but not necessary. And I think now that the religion has evolved more into the mainstream, the Lukumi faith has, people are starting to discontinue using the word Santeria, which is Santeria means it's a Spanish term for worship of saints. Okay. And now we're seeing less and less people using the Catholic, uh, syncretism, and they're actually calling these saints by their names. So I don't go around saying Saint Anthony, I go around saying Elegua, right? And that's my other practice. So I've got two religious practices. So I have what I love about Wicca is it's nature-based. It's very much based on the movement of the seasons, the sun, the moon. I love that. It's it's also put me more in touch with the circadian rhythm of the sun and the earth, or, how like I wake up with the sun. Like when the sun comes up, I come up with it. And when the sun goes down, I go down with it. So that's natural. Um, and one thing that you begin noticing when you practice Wicca and you start getting in tune to the movements of nature and the sun and the moon and kind of the rhythm that in the heartbeat of the earth, you'll start noticing your body changing. You begin noticing uh, there's times of the year, depending on when you were born, that you are more active in your career, you're more active in life, you get more excited. For instance, the fall gets me very excited. I'm a winter baby. I was born on March 1st, so right before the spring equinox. And so there's this thing about the fall that really attracts me because I grew up in Vegas. It's always hot here, you know. But the spring doesn't, it doesn't, it's nice. I like the spring. I like to see things bloom, but for me, it's the fall. The fall is really when Earth is giving of her abundance. And so in the Lukumi faith, it's more based on uh, your relationship with the Orisha. Okay, the Orisha are the gods or the spirits the the Lukumi faith, and so and each one has an attribute, whereas one is Oshun, for instance, she's the goddess of beauty and of sweet water, of rivers. And she loves gold and she loves beauty, and her symbols are gold and a bell and a mirror, a handheld mirror. And she is the epitome of female beauty, right? And then there's Yemaya, who is associated with the sea. So she is of the sea. So she is the mother of fish. Okay, so that's and then there's the spirit Olokun. Olokun is a genderless, could be female or male, god of the depths of the ocean. I actually have Olokun, and we actually went to the ocean, and I received Olokun, and there was this whole beautiful ceremony went through, and so these gods add a special protection to you, a level of protection, and also help you and guide you through your life. There is a morality here also. It's very important to understand that if the gods tell you you can't do something, you can't do it. And if you do it, you'll have to face the consequences. And, there's different aspects. It's almost like, how Christians and Jews and Muslims have one God, right? And so that one God is the God of everything. You pray to God for everything. Whereas in Lukumi also has a God. They are technically a monotheistic religion. So they have a major God, and then Olodumare, and then you have all the lesser spirits. Whereas basically God is like a manager or a CEO, and he outsources his duties to other spirits, right? And so not much different than Catholic saints. So whereas, I mean, the saints are imbued with a special attribute. Like Saint Anthony is the saint of lost things, right?
I once
And
heard a story about Saint Anthony saying to God, "What on earth did I do in my life that I deserve to spending eternity looking for people's lost car keys?"
And Elegua, that's funny. Elegua, when you lose something, you invoke Elegua. Elegua, I lost something, or Elegua opens doors. And the idea of finding things, especially keys open doors, right? And so there's this whole thing. And I'm going to tell you a true story. How I always had Elegua in my life ever since I was a little kid. Elegua has always appeared in my life, and it wasn't until later on in my life that I finally received him and went through the ceremony, the Lukumi ceremony, and got him. And he's in my house. He's actually behind me in a little altar. And so Saint Anthony's a little bit more nuanced. When I worked at the Liberace Museum many, many years ago, and I'm sure many of your listeners may remember Liberace. I think, Linda, you might be a little too
Sure.
young to remember Liberace, right? So I grew up in Las Vegas, born and raised here, and the Liberace Museum was just a few blocks from my house. And when I was in college getting my degree in anthropology with an emphasis in museum studies, I ended up getting an internship at the Liberace Museum, and then eventually was hired as their collections manager slash curator. And we had a sculpture of St. Anthony in the museum because guess what? St. Anthony was Liberace's patron saint.
I didn't know that.
Liberace was Catholic, so very Catholic. He was actually a very conservative Catholic,
Oh, I
despite
did
all
not
the
know
rest.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. He donated to Catholic charities. He donated a lot of money to the Catholic Church. As a matter of fact, he has a famous photo of him and his family with Pope Pius XII.
Hmm.
Yeah, and they he so there was a very famous story with Liberace in 1962. He was cleaning his shoes or he's polishing his shoes. This was kind of a low in his career. His career kind of waned post 1950s, and he was kind of having a lull in his career. And he was using some shoe polish, and uh, he ended up getting sick from it, and they did not give him a lot of time to live because his kidneys had shut down.
Oh.
So whatever fumes he picked up from the shoe polish affected him. He ended up in the hospital. And when he was sleeping, a nun had walked in a white habit and said, "If you pray to Saint Anthony, he will save your life."
Wow.
And he did. And a miracle ensued. And he remembers talking to the other nuns in the hospital. It was in a Catholic hospital. And he said, you know, a nun came to me in a white habit, and the nuns at the hospital said, there are no nuns in white habits here. They're all wearing the normal Cossack. And so it was, and it was a miracle. He was saved. He saved his health turned around. He ended up donating a wing to that hospital, as a matter of fact, for this miracle. And he vowed that he would build St. Anthony a shrine in his house, and he did. And so he had a little private chapel to St. Anthony at his home in Palm Springs. And ergo, 2001, I end up getting a job at the Liberace Museum, and there's St. Anthony standing there right at the entrance to the museum. And as I was doing research on Liberace, specifically of the items that were in his shrine, I noticed that St. Anthony had a crown, had a little crown. You know, I mean, I don't think St. Anthony really has a crown, but Liberace had put a crown on him.
Hmm.
So, you know, we each worship anyway, right? And
Right.
so I was cleaning St. Anthony because it was carved out of one piece of wood, one trunk of wood, and it's quite beautiful. And it needed a treatment. It needed a wood treatment. And so I got some linseed oil and I started clean. At first I dusted it, cleaned it. And you know, Linda, I just put my hand on St. Anthony's shoulder and I said, St. Anthony, you're the saint of lost things. Um, where is your crown? I'm not kidding. 24 hours later, I found the crown underneath the bathroom sink in one of the guest bathrooms
Oh my
at
gosh.
the Liberace Museum. And I found the crown and I put it back on him. And I was like, okay, I was hooked. I was hooked. I was hooked. I was like, okay, I like this guy. This guy's, you know, has been in my life. And I never thought that until years later, I find out that St. Anthony was syncretized with the Legua, and their attributes are very similar. And so St. Anthony plays a huge role in my life, as does Elegua for obvious reasons. So yeah, so there's this syncretism that exists, and I think that's the beauty of of my religious practices is that look, I feel as comfortable in a Buddhist temple, in a Jewish synagogue, in a mosque, in a Catholic cathedral, in a you know in a temple I don't know what are the Jehovah's Witnesses called, there's a Kingdom Hall. You know, I feel
Yes.
sacred spaces are sacred spaces. So I feel I I appreciate the religious aspects of all religions around the world as long as they don't harm anybody. And if it attracts me, it attracts me. Look, I have my office in Chinatown. I have the dragon turtle on my desk because he's supposed to bring business and good luck. And so I have him too. So very, very spiritual, very spiritual.
What do you think is why is there so many misconceptions about not only about Wicca? I was going to ask you about Wicca, but I think so many of us have misconceptions about other people's spirituality and their faith. I don't know if there's any answer to bringing us all together somehow, but as, have you experienced that at all? That people have misperceptions about Wicca or about, and I was not familiar with leukemia. Am I pronouncing
Lukumi, yeah. With
leukemia?
Lukumi, yeah.
Um,
Lukumi.
do you think a lot of people have misperceptions that they need to educate, which is partly why I wanted to interview you because I think I knew you had a wide variety of religions in your background. I didn't realize how wide until today. But what can we do to kind of build that understanding, if anything? I don't know.
Oh, that's an age-old question, Linda. I think, and it's frustrating to see the weaponization of religious practices in politics, because I think that has done an enormous amount of damage societal wise and culturally wise. Not to bring up politics, but it is important because I think we've seen um, perfect example is and why people have their misconceptions about Wicca, why they call us Satan worshipers, why they think the Lukumi practitioners have their ideas, these foreign religions that are not part of America or not part of the Western world. And unfortunately, it is because the Western world is steeped in folklore, as you can imagine. Don't walk under don't drop salt, don't walk under stairs or a ladder. I mean, come on. I mean, the English have Merlin for God's sake. I mean? So, and funny enough, the largest group of practitioners of Wicca in the world is in England. They have 3 million, it's
Really?
believed to have 3 million practitioners and so you go to England, they're very much open-minded to other practices. And again, it goes back to the hegemony of the big monotheistic organized religions and how they treat minorities, right? Religious minorities and a score of other minorities. For instance, a perfect example is the justification of slavery among Catholics. How can you justify that? And there is no justification. It's the misinterpretation of the ancient scriptures of the Jewish people, and one that really bothers me. And I'm a gay man, and it took me over 25 years to figure out who I am as a human being on this planet. And it's the book of Leviticus is the one that's always cited, where a man shall not lie with another man. And I get thrown that out a lot. I get, and people who call themselves Christians, supposed Christians, love to throw that out and say, well, they'll make that comment, well, men shouldn't lie with men and women shouldn't lie with women. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Let me let me preface your statement, or let me state something. Let me counteract you a little bit. If you say that's what God wants and that's in the Bible, which by the way is the Old Testament, which is the sacred book of the Jews, so you're misinterpreting the sacred book of a completely different other religious creed and practice. Um, and yet you refuse to acknowledge the rest of what Leviticus says. So, I mean, shrimp cocktails. You have no problem going to Red
Right.
Lobster, eating shrimp cocktail, pork chops, bacon, salami, spam, watching football on the weekends. Football players play with pigskin. I mean, there's so many. I mean, are you ready to get stoned to death? And then what about farmers? You can't grow corn next to soy. I mean, there's all these other rules, and you can't work on the Sabbath. You can't, and look, they when you tell them that, they're like, oh, I said, yeah, exactly. And then I tell them the most important thing is, please do not use the sacred book of the Jewish people and misinterpret it for your own political gain. That is, or gain. That is the thing that bothers me the most. And the level of hypocrisy that exists among some of the major religions. But again, you look at the Catholics, for example. Look, Catholic Church is not perfect, okay? But it is the oldest Christian church in history, 2,000 years and going, right? Hundreds of popes have come and gone. Each one has interpreted or has guided the church in a different way. Uh, and so I've been through 5 popes in my lifetime, right? Pope John Paul II was the one I remember the most, right? And then he passed away, and then we got Benedict, and then Francis, and now Leo. And so, actually, no, 6, because I think one pope only lasted 30
John
days when
Paul
he
the
was a kid.
First, right?
Yeah, Paul
He
the
didn't
First.
live
Yeah,
very
John Paul the First.
long.
And so you know, I think the Roman Catholic Church has done a great job in coming to terms with its past. It's not perfect. It's not perfect, but they have realized their great responsibility of being the oldest Christian church. And I think the level of pragmatism that exists among the Catholic leadership, at least at the Vatican, that I've noticed, has given me some hope for the future, right? A little bit more open-minded, understanding that we're all human beings on the same rock. Doesn't matter what color skin you are. It doesn't matter, what your sexual preferences are, what your religious preferences are. The Catholic Church is a leader in that. And it's not just, you don't have to be Catholic or Christian, but the Pope is the Pope. And the Pope has, at least in my experience from seeing all the multiple popes, they have helped guide the church in a very pragmatic way without being too far to the right, too far to the left. Just take it, take it easy, right? And so another one that a huge influence in my life as well, who also takes a very pragmatic approach, is the Dalai Lama,
Hmm.
right? Very great spiritual leader. Another one that has influenced me in understanding spirituality has been Mother Teresa, right? And there are others out there. I've been watching a lot of young Jewish Kabbalists as well, young people that have embraced Kabbalah, uh, and some of the things they have you understand about, the essence of God and how God is and why God does what they do and what have you. And so I have hope, but again, in these trying times, especially in the United States right now, where we've gone into a very interesting time politically, there is this rise of Christian nationalism, which is, in my opinion, not Christianity. It's not, it doesn't espouse anything that Jesus said. At the end, I tell some of these people, I'm like, Jesus was Jewish first, and he was always Jewish, and he took a pragmatic approach. He looked at the world very differently than anybody else at that time, and at a very controversial, at a very not controversial, but a very difficult time in Israel's history. They had just gotten taken over by the Romans. They were in the middle of a civil war. They were going through prophets like toilet paper. I mean, and you had Saint John the Baptist, and you had Jesus coming around, and so he came at a very important time in human society in the Mediterranean. Now, we're not going to talk about India or China or other places because that's a whole nother, I think, another discussion, what's going on in those spheres. But again, Jesus and his influence in the Western world, in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, was impactful. But I think one of the challenging things for uh, for society today, especially in the United States, with the rise of Christian nationalism, is that they have lost who Jesus was. And honestly, as a Wiccan and as a Lukumi practitioner, I think Jesus more as a magician than this prophet. A magician being someone who practices magic, because let's face it, he walked on water. He cured the sick. He brought people back to life from death. He resurrected himself. Um, there is this, he was able to predict the future. I mean, these are very magical aspects. And so, but he didn't have a problem healing a leper or hanging out with the poor or feeding the poor. And there's that great story of when someone wanted to worship with him. This young, wealthy man who was riding on the back of a donkey, and Jesus said to him, "Follow me, but leave all this behind." And the young man couldn't leave it. And I forgot the name of him, but I think that's a huge that tells you a lot.
Right.
There's a lot there, and I think people just seem to forget that. And even though I don't practice Christianity, um, I can still respect what Jesus did as a human being, as an incredibly enlightened person who changed society. The problem wasn't Jesus or his teachings. The problem is humans and how they've misinterpreted um, those teachings and the Bible and how the Bible has changed over time.
Absolutely.
Example is the King James version of the Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's his version of the Bible. It's not, it's like, so
Well, I think I see definitely part two of this interview because I feel like we're running out of time and I have so many more things to ask you and I know you have so much more to share. So I think we're going to have to schedule a part two very
I
soon. But
would, I would love to.
before we end though, is there any final words that you would like to share with the people?
Yeah, religion is a religion and spirituality is a big part of my life. Um, I, especially with the loss of my mothers, both my moms within a few months of each other, I I've been very fortunate to have been raised in a beautiful family, a big family, with this Judeo-Christian background, I feel comfortable in both circles, and I appreciate the foundation of what that gave me to understand spirituality on a global scale. I'm also an anthropologist,
Hmm.
and anthropologists study culture and society, and especially religion. And I am fascinated with the religious practices of Native Americans and how they look at the world and in nature also. Because let's face it, we haven't discovered other species on other planets yet. I think we're getting close. All right, we're the third rock from the sun, Linda. All we have, we're this beautiful planet. It's a garden planet. It's in that perfect Goldilocks part of the solar system, right? Not too close to the sun, not too far away. And we need to understand that we're 8 billion people on this rock, and distance is what gives us our uniqueness, but also we also have to live close to each other in cities and places like that. And I think the important thing is that we all have to respect each other. My religious practice, okay, I may have my political opinions, okay, but my whether I practice Lukumi, Wicca, Judaism, or Catholicism or whatever, it's about respecting other people and their beliefs. Unlike the Southern Baptists, which recently came out saying we're going to vote on making sure that marriage equality in the United States is overturned. Why, in your religious practice, would you want to do that? What does that advance? If you're trying to, um, if you're trying to evangelize, okay, like Jesus has said, spread the word, okay, that's not spreading the word. That is spreading hate, okay. Two gay men aren't going to hurt you, and they're not going to hurt society, okay, all right. And but that doesn't further the good word of Christ. Okay. Um, in my practice, if you're a Christian, fine. I'm not going to go and say anything to you. I'm not going to go and marginalize you. Why would I do that? I have my opinions. We can all love Jesus. We can all love humanity. We can all love society. But it's important that we respect every religion, every culture, every person on this planet, because let's face it, this is the only rock we're on for right now. Okay. And so it marginalizing minorities isn't the way, because we shouldn't forget, and I think this is the most important message, is Christians today should not do what the Romans did to early Christians in the past, or what they did to Jews. Romans were a little bit more open-minded to Jews as long as they didn't have create civil wars. Okay, because the Romans were open-minded. The Romans would go to Egypt, and they ended up uh, uh, syncretizing with ancient Egyptian gods. So I think it's important to not use religion to pursue a political agenda that marginalizes people. That's not what Jesus would want. That's not what society should be about. And I think that's, if there's anything I can leave us with, is, harm none, do what they're well, and blessed be.
Well, that's a perfect closing. I really want to thank you, Paco. It's been enlightening to me, and I hope that other people also are enlightened and will maybe think a little bit differently before they start thinking about this religion is right and this religion is wrong. And we have a lot more in common, as I always say, than we have that it's not in common. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
And we will plan on a session too, I'm sure. But thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Linda, for the opportunity. It's good to see you. I
You
hope you're
too.
having an amazing time in your new home. We miss you. And I'm available at any time.